Hi guys and girls. So today I'm going to be going through Unit 4 Psychology Revision for the exam for the 2017 to 2022 study design, and we're looking more specifically at consciousness today. So first up, we're just going to look at some of the tips that you can implement for the exams. My best advice would be to do practice exams, because then that way you know what you're getting wrong and what you need to revise, and you can avoid revising things that you're already fully aware of. The more you do, the better off you'll be. Create your own resources. Don't just rely on your teachers. Actually go through everything and do it yourself, because it will be better off for you because it is catered to your needs. So we're going to look at consciousness first up. So consciousness can be defined as our awareness of events and objects in the world around us. It can also include our own mental experiences and sensations. So essentially it is what you actually are aware of. And it is not something that it's all or nothing. It is measured on a continuum. And it has two extremes. At one extreme, you have total awareness, and at the other, you have a total lack of awareness. So there are two categories of consciousness. There's normal waking consciousness and altered states of consciousness. Now, normal waking consciousness, or NWC, and when you get to exams and SACs, because this is a universally accepted abbreviation, you can actually use NWC instead of writing it completely out. However, I do recommend that you write it out at least once and then in brackets do the abbreviation, so in that way you're covering all your bases. So NWC, or normal waking consciousness, refers to states of consciousness associated with being awake and alert and aware of your surroundings. Now those three A's, so we'll just put a little thing in here, the awake, alert and aware of your surroundings, they like you, so VCAR likes you to actually use those words, right? They're called the three A's of normal waking consciousness. So you're aware of and awake and alert of your surroundings and mental experiences. You can maintain a sense of time and place. Usually it involves heightened awareness, and you spend most of your day in NWC. So when you're driving a car, when you're in school, hopefully, when you're completing a test, or pretty much your everyday functions are in normal waking consciousness. An altered state of consciousness is a state that is clearly different from normal waking consciousness in terms of awareness levels. So once again, we've got one of those A words in there, but you need to put in that it's clearly different from normal waking consciousness. So make sure that when and if they ever ask you a definition of what's the difference between the two, you always have that it is clearly different from normal waking consciousness. Define normal waking consciousness first, then altered. So an ASC can be natural or it can be induced. Examples of natural ASCs include sleeping and daydreaming. Examples of induced, which means you brought them on, are alcohol-induced, intoxicated, drug-induced, hypnosis, or a coma. Alrighty, so we've got one of the exam questions. I'm not going to go through it. I'm pretty sure you can do that yourself. So, how do we measure consciousness? So, 3 devices used to measure physiological responses which can indicate consciousness levels. An electroencephalograph, EEG, is a device that detects, amplifies, and records electrical activity of the brain. So we've got the acronym DARE. Basically, it measures brain waves. Now, once again, you need to be very specific if you are mentioning these. So at any point you happen to see EEG, EMG, EOG, EKG, you must have detects, amplifies, and records electrical activity of. Every single time. VCAR will not accept it unless you do. So make sure that you have it. So electroencephalograph measures brain waves. The electromyograph, and I always like to remember the M, measures muscle tension. So once again, detects, amplifies, and records electrical activity of. the muscles. Always remember that M. So it measures muscle movement and tension. An electroencephalograph is a device that detects, amplifies, and records electrical activity of the muscles that control eye movements. Now, a lot of people get this one wrong because they tend to actually call it, they say of the eyes, and it's not. It's the muscles that control eye movements. So, there are different measures of consciousness, not as widely used as the others, but still. So measurement of speed and accuracy on cognitive tasks. So speed refers to the response time to a stimulus. Accuracy involves the number of correct or incorrect responses made. So essentially what they're saying is, let's say I give you a test where you have to, I don't know, get as many words correct as possible. If you're in an NWC, you're more likely to be quicker and more accurate with that test than what you would be if you're an ASC. If you're an ASC, you might actually get more wrong, you might be slower to actually complete it, right? And it is an objective measure because you can measure it numerically. So if you can't have access to the other devices, so the EMG, EOG, or the EEG, you could use a speed and accuracy test on cognitive tasks. The third one is subjective reporting. Obviously, these aren't very good because they're not going to be reliable. Everybody lies in a test. So pretty much what this is saying is that, right, you can use self-reports and they're going to be responding to questions. You keep your sleep diary. But the issue with a sleep diary is that you're not going to know exactly when you fell asleep and when exactly you woke up during the night. It is subjective, which means that it is open to bias. So if it's open to bias, it means that it's not going to be valid in a lot of ways. The last one is video monitoring, and this is usually during sleep studies. In fact, it's predominantly in sleep studies. And it can look at the movement and tossing and turning, night terrors, or sleepwalking. So these are more of the physical responses that it has a look at. You can pause that and read through it yourself. All right, consciousness. So a number of changes in physiological state that a person experiences in an altered state of consciousness when compared to normal waking consciousness. So in an exam, you need to know these specific characteristics. And that's the word that VCA likes to use. What are the characteristics of normal waking consciousness or altered state of consciousness? Now, they're almost exactly the same in regards to what characteristics are there. It's just how you respond to them are going to be different in ASC and NWC. So awareness is the first one. People in normal waking consciousness tend to have a higher level of awareness. So in NWC, you tend to have a higher level of awareness than people in altered state of consciousness. Your content limitations. People in normal waking consciousness generally have more restricted content than people in altered state of consciousness. During NWC, the content tends to be more organized and logical than during an ASC. During an ASC, the content tends to be more illogical and disorganized. So pretty much what that means is that in NWC, when they say more restricted content, it means that you can focus your attention. You can focus on one specific thing. In an ASC, you might be, you get very distracted very easily and you can't focus on that one thing. And when you're in NWC, your thoughts are logical, they're organized. But if you're in ASC, let's say, for example, you're drinking, you're on drugs, whatever floats your boat, right, don't do it. You might actually have issues where you can't focus on one specific thing, or you might be focusing on one thing and then all of a sudden, oh wow, my hand is shiny, whatever, right? So content limitations, you're more restricted in NWC. In perceptual and cognitive distortions is the next one. So in NWC, our perception of the world tends to be realistic. We know that, the sky is blue. We know that the grass is green. All the sights and sounds and pain are just normal. They're the normal reactions. They're realistic. Right? Your emotion. In ASC, it could have one or two effects. So it can either go up or it can go down. So your senses could be more vivid, right? You see colors that are more brighter, right? Sounds are louder. Or it could make them dull. So it could actually lessen our perceptual and cognitive distortions. So during an ASC, cognitive functioning tends to be impaired. So your thought processes are more illogical and disorganized, and people have trouble solving and retrieving information from memory. In fact, they even say that at some points, if you're trying to remember where you put your keys when you were drunk, it'd probably be easier to get drunk and find your keys than what it would be if you just looked for them while sober. But who knows? Emotional awareness is the next one, so another characteristic. Like our perceptions, and individuals' emotions can change during an ASC. In NWC, people's emotions are generally relatively stable and predictable, and they are able to control the emotions that they express. So you react normally to things, whereas in an ASC, people become more or less emotional. For example, when drunk, you might suddenly get angry, whereas during meditation, you can feel completely emotionless. I've met people who have been drunk and they have no reaction whatsoever. So people's emotional responses are highly unpredictable and can be inappropriate. Self-control. In NWC, people tend to have a high level of self-control over movements and actions, right? You're aware of your emotions, so you're also aware of what you can and cannot do, and you're not going to change that. Whereas in an ASC, you tend to have less control over movements and actions. So you might actually stumble when trying to walk because you can't get your balance right, whatever it is. Time orientation. So time orientation is a big one, and it's usually asked a lot in exams and SACs. So during NWC, we generally have a pretty clear sense of time passing or how much time has passed. We know that if we're focused on the work, then we know how much time has gone. We can keep track of time. However, during an ASC, so when you're drunk, right, you might have a distorted sense of time. It might be going really, really fast or really, really slow, right? The wording of whether or not it's fast or slow can be avoided if you just say that it's a distorted sense of time. So this little table that's on there, you may want to pause the video, do a screenshot, whatever you need to do, right? Because this is actually a very good table that summarizes it exactly. So, controlled and automatic processes. So a controlled process involves conscious and alert awareness and mental effort, and an individual is focusing on achieving a particular goal. A controlled process is often used when a task is new or difficult. So if you're learning how to drive for the first time, this would be a controlled process. An automatic process requires very little conscious effort. It doesn't affect the performance of other activities. So you can do other things at the same time. Right? It's very familiar to you. It's very simple. People can generally perform multiple tasks at the same time. That's what I just said. Right? So someone who's knitting and has been doing so for the last 50 years, they would be in an automatic process. They don't even need to look anymore. People in ASC generally struggle to perform controlled processes. For attention, selective attention is when an individual attends to one specific stimuli and ignores all other. Divided attention is when an individual distributes their attention to multiple stimuli and therefore is able to complete multiple tasks simultaneously. People with ASC will generally struggle with selective attention. They can't focus on one thing. They always get distracted. And you can pause and read through this question. Alrighty. So there are different brainwaves associated with consciousness, and this is usually due to drugs or alcohol, whatever. So there are 4 different types of brainwaves. Right? Beta is high frequency, low amplitude, and it's usually when you're concentrating on a task. Alpha is medium to high frequency and low amplitude and associated with people that are awake but very relaxed. This is usually light meditation as well. Theta is medium frequency with a mix of high and low amplitude and is associated with people falling asleep or very deep relaxation / meditation. Delta is low frequency and high amplitude, usually associated with 3 and 4 sleep only. So when we're talking about stimulants, stimulants are drugs that increase activity in the central nervous system and the rest of the body. For example, caffeine, nicotine, amphetamines, cocaine, right? Essentially, it's increasing beta brain wave activity and decreases alpha, theta, and delta, right? So essentially, you're increasing the frequency of the waves, right, and decreasing the amplitude. So whether or not they're going really, really high or really, really low, right? This increases the activity in the central nervous system, so it speeds things up. Depressants do the opposite, and these aren't like depressants that you take for depression. This is just depressants as a whole. So alcohol, heroin, morphine. It could also be marijuana, benzodiazepines. They tend to lead to brainwaves of decreased frequency and increased amplitude. Right, so there's an increase in delta, theta, and alpha waves, right, and decrease beta. So it slows things down in the central nervous system. So stimulants increase the activity, depressants decrease. And you may want to pause and read the question. Alrighty. So the effects of consciousness in regards to a full night's sleep deprivation are compared to legal blood alcohol concentration. Now this is a question that is coming up a lot in exams. They will ask this question, no doubt. So in 1997, Dawson and Reed performed a study looking at the effects of sleep deprivation in comparison to alcohol consumption. Dawson and Reed found that the cognitive psychomotor performance, so in other words, your ability to think and your ability to move of a person that was fully sleep deprived for 17 hours was equal to people with a BAC of 0.05, which is the legal BAC limit for driving in Australia. So pretty much what they found was that if you have been sleep deprived for 17 hours, it's almost as like you were drunk, legally drunk, right? You'd have the same sort of reaction time, same sort of cognitive thoughts, right? As if you were drunk. Now, they also found that people who were fully sleep deprived for 24 hours was equivalent to someone who had a BAC of 0.10. Now, wording is important with this one. It is not somebody who is drunk. So just because you haven't slept for 17 hours doesn't mean that you are drunk with a 0.05 blood alcohol concentration. No. What you need to make sure that you write is that 17 hours of sleep deprivation is similar or has similar symptoms to somebody who has a blood alcohol concentration of 0.05. Also remember the numbers. 17 hours is equal to a BAC of 0.05. 24 hours of sleep deprivation is similar to a BAC of 0.10. In a follow-up study, Dawson looked at the effect of sleep deprivation and alcohol on a range of cognitive tasks, and it's found that the effect of 1 day's full sleep deprivation was equal to a BAC of 0.5. Results for the two different studies were generally pretty consistent. So just stick with these 2 dot points, this one here and this one here. That's the main focus of it. Also, try to remember who created these studies, because sometimes they might just ask, what was the result of Dawson-Reed's experiment? Yeah, Vicaramine, what can I say? All right, so this is just a summary. So mood is Mood is a variable that could impact the results of the studies of Dawson and Reed. Sleep deprivation also tends to lead to a negative mood, so for example grumpiness, which could then impact the performance on the task, whereas alcohol consumption may not lead to a negative mood. Now this bit here, may not, so these are the issues with the study, right? If you're in a bad mood, you're not going to do the test properly, you're not going to, put your absolute best into it. So the fact that they've said alcohol consumption may not lead to this negative mood, it's the may part that you should be focusing on. Some people who drink alcohol do get into, depressive moods and negative moods. Sleep deprivation can lead to impaired decision-making and slower reaction time, both of which could be dangerous if driving a vehicle. That's pretty much the thing that you should be getting out of that. So if you are very sleepy or sleep deprived, there is a good chance that your driving ability, so you'll have slower reaction time and you'd have impaired decision making. So you might, let's say for example, you see a car coming and you want to turn into its lane, you might actually turn into it even though you know that there's not much time to get into that lane. Some tips for you. Know the definitions of EEG, EOG, and EMG word for word. Make sure that you include, detect, amplify, and record electrical activity of the, so there. Don't get them confused. Think of the O as in O, EOG as an I. No general effects due to changes in consciousness. Use common sense. I always found a good one to use in short answer questions was a distorted sense of time. It comes up a lot, that distorted sense of time. Stimulants increase beta brainwaves and depressants decrease beta brainwaves. All right, so if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask.